There comes a moment when life doesn't just test you, it breaks you. It doesn't announce its arrival with warning signs or gentle whispers. It crashes through the walls you built, tearing apart everything that once made sense. One day you wake up and the world feels slightly off, a silence in familiar places, an emptiness where laughter used to live. The people who promised to stay are suddenly ghosts in your memory, and the future you thought was certain now feels like a story written by someone else. He sat in that silence, motionless, staring at the ceiling as if it held the answers he'd lost. The air was thick, unmoving, filled with questions that refused to fade. Why me? How did it come to this? The words barely escaped his lips, breaking the quiet just enough to remind him he was still here. But even that felt uncertain. When everything falls apart, time slows down, seconds stretch into hours, and every thought feels heavier than the last. It wasn't just the loss that hurt, it was the disbelief, the illusion of control, gone. Everything he'd built, everything he believed in, had crumbled in front of him. You think you can predict life, that your plans can hold it steady. But then it happens, one choice, one moment, one heartbreak, and suddenly everything familiar feels foreign. The room you've lived in for years looks strange. The mirror shows someone you barely recognize. You try to move, to speak, but even your own voice sounds distant, like it's coming from another life. Friends stop calling. The world keeps spinning. And you begin to understand the cruel truth. Pain doesn't ask permission. It arrives uninvited, like a storm that doesn't care who it destroys. You can't reason with it, can't negotiate your way out. All you can do is stand in the wreckage and wonder if anything will ever make sense again. That's the part no one tells you about breaking. It's not loud, not cinematic. It's quiet. It's sitting alone, scrolling through memories that now feel like lies. It's smiling in public while your chest feels hollow. He tried to find comfort in routine, to pretend it was just another bad day. But deep down, something had changed. The weight in his chest wasn't just sadness. It was realization, the kind that shifts everything. He wasn't the same person anymore. The world had taken something from him, something invisible but vital. And that loss, it left a silence too deep for words. Sometimes he'd catch himself replaying old conversations, like faded tapes looping in his head. Friends laughing, promises made, futures planned. And then the memory would glitch, freezing on that one moment, the one that broke it all. That's the cruel thing about memory. It traps you between what was and what will never be again. The mind clings to what it can't fix, rewinding the pain in search of an answer that doesn't exist. Nights were the worst. That's when everything got louder, the doubts, the fears, the self-blame. He'd lie awake, staring into the dark, feeling like the world had forgotten him. He wanted to scream, to fight back, but all he could do was whisper into the emptiness, "Please, just stop." And yet, somewhere in that darkness, something stirred. Not hope, not yet, but awareness. The faint, painful realization that this was life's way of stripping him bare, showing him the truth he'd been avoiding. Pain doesn't wait for you to be ready. It doesn't care about your plans or timing. It just comes, tearing through your carefully constructed life, forcing you to see what you've been running from. And when it does, you have two choices: to keep pretending or to finally face what's left behind. He didn't know it yet, but this collapse, this breaking, was a beginning. Every piece that had fallen apart would one day reveal its reason. But for now, all he could do was breathe through the ache, sit in the silence, and accept that the old version of himself was gone. The world he knew had ended, and a new one, unfamiliar, raw, and painfully real, had just begun. And as the night grew still again, a single thought surfaced from somewhere deep inside him. Fragile, trembling, but alive. Maybe this is where I finally start over. After the chaos comes a silence that's louder than pain. It doesn't roar or scream. It lingers. It sits with you in every room, heavy and unyielding, filling the spaces where laughter used to live. The noise of loss fades, the people disappear, and what's left behind is an echo that refuses to leave. Days stretch endlessly, blurring into each other, and you start to wonder if the world has truly gone quiet or if you've just stopped listening. The silence after the storm is deceptive. At first, it feels like peace, a momentary relief after being torn apart. But soon, it reveals its true face: emptiness. The kind that seeps into your bones, that makes the smallest sounds, a door closing, the hum of the refrigerator, your own breath, feel painfully loud. You walk through your life like a ghost, touching things that no longer feel familiar, retracing steps that no longer lead anywhere. He would wake up every morning with the same thought: I didn't recognize the person I had become. His reflection stared back at him, tired, unshaven, eyes hollow. There was no anger left, no tears, just numbness, the kind that doesn't announce itself with heartbreak or despair, but with a quiet acceptance that something inside has gone missing. The days became mechanical. Eat, work, sleep, repeat, a routine designed not for living, but for surviving. The world had moved on. Friends returned to their lives. Messages stopped coming, and even the sympathy faded into silence. It's strange how life continues for everyone else while yours stands still. You start to feel like a background character in your own story, someone who once mattered but now simply exists. The loneliness of survival cuts deeper than the initial pain, because pain is sharp, immediate. Loneliness is slow, like a tide that never stops rising. At night, the silence grew heavier. He'd sit in the dark, staring at the faint light of his phone screen, scrolling through meaningless things just to distract himself from the quiet. But distraction doesn't heal. It only delays the confrontation. And eventually, when the screen went black, the silence returned, pressing down until even breathing felt like effort. That's when the realization began to take shape. Not in a flash of clarity, but in the stillness between thoughts. Silence wasn't emptiness. It was space. The aftermath wasn't a void. It was a ground waiting for something to grow. He didn't know when it happened exactly, maybe on the 5th sleepless night or the 50th, but one morning he noticed the faintest difference. The sunlight creeping through the curtains looked softer, warmer somehow. The air didn't feel as heavy. For the first time in what felt like forever, he noticed the sound of birds outside, the rhythm of life continuing beyond his isolation. It wasn't joy, not yet. It was awareness. The first flicker of life returning to a place he thought was dead. The silence began to change its shape. It no longer felt like punishment. It became a mirror, one that forced him to look inward. Every unanswered question, every unspoken word was reflected back. And though it was uncomfortable, it was also honest. There was nowhere left to run. No noise to drown it out. Just him and the truth of who he had become. He started to see that maybe silence wasn't his enemy. Maybe it was his teacher. It stripped away the distractions, the illusions, the constant need to be okay. It left behind only what was real. And in that stillness, he began to understand that healing doesn't always come with grand gestures or sudden revelations. Sometimes it begins quietly, in the moments when you finally stop fighting what is. He sat by the window one evening, watching the fading light touch the sky. It wasn't the world that had changed. It was him. For the first time, the silence didn't scare him. It held something new, possibility, a small, fragile feeling, barely noticeable but undeniably present. The need to feel again, to live again. And in that stillness, between what was broken and what might one day be whole, he whispered to himself, not as a plea, but as a promise. This isn't the end. It's the quiet before the beginning. At your lowest, life holds up a mirror and forces you to look. Not the kind of mirror that shows your face, but the one that reflects everything you've been running from. It doesn't care about your excuses, your justifications, or the stories you tell yourself to feel better. It just waits, silently, patiently, until you're too tired to look away. And when you finally do, what stares back isn't just a reflection. It's the truth. He sat on the edge of his bed one night, the same dim light flickering on the wall, the same silence pressing down. His eyes drifted toward the mirror across the room. For a long time, he didn't move. The image looking back at him was familiar, yet foreign. There was a hollowness there, a quiet ache that no amount of pretending could cover. And in that stillness, a thought emerged, sharp, unwelcome, and painfully honest. Maybe it wasn't them. Maybe it was me. The words hung in the air, echoing louder than any argument he'd ever had. He tried to dismiss it, to push it away, but it clung to him. Every memory, every moment he had blamed someone else for his pain began replaying. Not as scenes of betrayal, but as moments of misunderstanding, pride, and fear. The mirror didn't accuse. It revealed. It showed the choices made in anger, the silence held in stubbornness, the chances for forgiveness that were ignored because ego felt safer than vulnerability. He remembered the friend he stopped talking to over a single harsh word, the relationship he sabotaged because he was afraid of being left first, the times he pretended not to care, just to hide how deeply he did. Each flashback hit harder than the last, not because of what others did, but because of what he hadn't faced within himself. There was a strange comfort in blaming others, in believing life had simply been unfair. But the truth was far more difficult. The realization that pain had become a shield and pride had been mistaken for strength. The mirror moment is cruel in its honesty. It doesn't show monsters or villains, only the fragile, frightened human underneath. It's not about guilt, though it often starts there. It's about recognition. Seeing that for every time life hurt you, there were moments you hurt yourself too, through denial, through avoidance, through fear. He saw how he'd held on to anger, because it was easier than admitting he was scared. How he'd chosen silence over connection, because vulnerability felt like weakness. "Why did I do that?" he whispered. But the mirror didn't answer. It didn't need to. The answer wasn't out there. It was in him, buried beneath layers of self-defense and unspoken regret. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel it all. The disappointment, the grief, the guilt. And instead of running, he sat with it. Because maybe healing wasn't about erasing the past, but understanding it. The hardest part of the mirror moment isn't what you see. It's realizing how long you've avoided seeing it. He remembered all the times he said he was fine, when inside he was breaking. How often he smiled through pain, because admitting weakness felt impossible. But in that quiet room, stripped of all distractions, the truth became clear. Pretending had only prolonged the hurt. The only way out was through. As the minutes passed, the reflection began to change, not physically, but emotionally. The person staring back didn't look like a failure anymore. He looked human, flawed, yes, but still standing, still capable of change. There was power in that, not the kind that comes from control, but the kind that comes from surrender. Accepting responsibility didn't mean self-blame. It meant reclaiming power. Because as long as everything was someone else's fault, he was helpless. But the moment he said, "I played a part too," he became free to do something about it. The clarity that followed wasn't peaceful. It was painful. Truth often is. But there was also a strange sense of relief, like a storm breaking after years of drought. For the first time, he could see a path forward, one built not on illusion, but honesty. The realization hit hard, but it also brought light. Healing doesn't begin when others apologize. It begins when you do. He stood up, looking at his reflection one last time. The same eyes, the same face, but something behind them had shifted. The guilt was still there, but now it carried understanding. The pain hadn't vanished, but it had meaning. He whispered softly, "I forgive you," not to anyone else, but to himself. And as he turned away, something inside him, something long buried, began to move again. It wasn't joy, not yet. It was a quiet, trembling awareness that the person he saw in the mirror was still worth saving. And that realization, that fragile spark of self-acceptance, was the first true step toward healing. Every breakdown hides a blueprint for rebirth. The room felt heavy, as if the air itself had absorbed every disappointment, every whispered doubt, every quiet failure. She sat slumped against the wall, the weight of everything pressing down like an invisible hand. Moments ago, the world had seemed endless, full of possibility. Now, even breathing felt like a task too great to manage. And yet, somewhere beneath the suffocating despair, a faint flicker of awareness stirred. Subtle, fragile, almost imperceptible. It whispered that even in the fragments of her life, a pattern existed, a path she hadn't yet dared to see. Darkness has a way of forcing honesty. In that silence, she recalled the words she once heard, spoken softly, like a secret meant only for the broken. Pain isn't punishment, it's preparation. At first, They sounded hollow, an abstract comfort she couldn't grasp. But as the minutes stretched into hours, the phrase began to resonate. Every failure, every loss, every sleepless night wasn't meaningless. Each had left a mark, an unseen guidepost pointing towards something more. The realization hit like a trembling tide. Falling apart wasn't the end. It was the beginning of understanding herself in ways the comfortable never allowed. She thought of the stranger she'd passed on the street earlier that week, a fleeting smile exchanged in passing, warm and unassuming, yet somehow grounding. It seemed insignificant at the time, but now it felt like a symbol, a reminder that even small sparks of kindness, even faint signs of hope, could pierce through the blackest night. She realized she'd been looking for grand gestures, monumental shifts, when sometimes a turning point arrives softly, disguised as ordinary moments. And it was in those moments that courage begins, fragile yet persistent, like the first shoots of spring breaking through frozen earth. Her mind replayed the events that had led here, the mistakes she couldn't undo, the relationships strained beyond repair, the opportunities lost to fear. It would have been easy to remain in the wreckage, to let despair calcify into identity. But now, for the first time, she felt the stirrings of a choice, the choice to remain broken or to rise again. And with that choice came clarity. She was not defined by what had happened to her, but by how she would respond. Pain, she understood, was not a chain to bind her, but a lever to lift her. She took a slow breath, feeling the tension coiling in her chest loosen slightly. It was uncomfortable. Growth often is. Doubt whispered that she wasn't strong enough, that she had failed too many times to try again. But beneath that voice, a steadier, quieter truth emerged. Strength isn't the absence of fear or failure. It's the willingness to continue despite them. And with each heartbeat, that truth felt more like a rhythm, grounding her, reminding her that the path forward was hers to choose. A shift occurred in her perception. The broken pieces of her past didn't suddenly fit neatly together, but she began to see patterns where there had been only chaos. Every rejection had taught resilience. Every betrayal had revealed the value of discernment. Every loss had cultivated empathy. The blueprint of her rebirth was hidden in the very fragments she had tried to discard, waiting patiently for her to notice. And noticing was enough. The act of recognition sparked something profound, the first conscious step toward reconstructing herself. She stood slowly, muscle stiff, mind racing, yet anchored by a fragile hope. The world outside hadn't changed. The shadows remained, the uncertainty lingered. But within her, a new narrative was forming. She wasn't the sum of what had fallen apart. She was the architect of what could be built next. She whispered aloud, not to anyone, but to herself, "I won't let this be the end." The words were simple, but weighty. They were a declaration, a commitment, and a promise to herself that the darkness would not claim her story. Even as she stepped toward the door, the small signs of life outside seemed amplified. A neighbor's laughter drifting from an open window, a dog barking in the distance, the faint golden light of sunset touching the edges of the street. Each detail, ordinary in isolation, now felt like a beacon. The world was not a punishment. It was a stage waiting for her re-entry. And with every step forward, she realized that courage does not roar. It often begins quietly, internally, as a decision to keep moving when the world feels indifferent to your suffering. The turning point was no longer abstract. It was tangible. She could feel the momentum building, subtle yet undeniable. The broken moments of yesterday had laid the foundation for the resilience of today. The choice to rise again was no longer theoretical. It was living, breathing, and unfolding with each deliberate movement. And in that delicate, exhilarating moment, she understood something vital. Sometimes the path from despair to hope is not sudden or spectacular. It is quiet, internal, and entirely within one's own hands. She paused at the threshold, glancing back at the space where she had sat in defeat. The shadows seemed less menacing now, the room less oppressive. A faint smile appeared on her lips, tentative but sincere. Somewhere deep inside, a fragile courage had taken root, and with it, the awareness that falling apart was not failure but preparation. And as she stepped into the light of the street, the whisper echoed again, this time filled with conviction. Pain isn't punishment. It's preparation. The blueprint was clear. and she was ready to build. You can't rebuild the same house, not after the fire. The walls that once held comfort now lie in rubble, charred and hollow, a stark reminder that some losses are permanent. She stood among the remnants, inhaling the faint scent of smoke and memory, feeling the weight of everything that had been taken. Yet beneath the heaviness, a whisper stirred. Maybe I needed to lose everything to find myself. It was not a sudden revelation, but a quiet acknowledgement, the first flicker of hope after long nights of darkness. The work ahead was immense. Transformation never comes in a single moment. It comes in slow, deliberate steps, in the accumulation of tiny victories that feel monumental when the world has stripped you bare. Each morning became an exercise in resilience. Simple tasks, opening the blinds, making tea, stepping outside, once mundane, now carried a weighty significance. The first sip of coffee in a quiet kitchen felt like reclaiming a small piece of normalcy. She began rebuilding routines, reintroducing structure to life, but with a gentleness she had never afforded herself before. The broken mirrors of her past no longer reflected only despair. They hinted at possibility. Every scar, every charred beam became a lesson, a guide to constructing a new foundation. And slowly, the fear that she would always be trapped in the ruins began to soften. Friends she had lost contact with began to reappear, tentative and cautious, like seedlings pushing through ash. Mentors offered guidance, but not in the form of instructions, rather, in quiet reminders that growth often follows destruction. Conversations that had once seemed impossible now flowed with honesty, and laughter, once forgotten, returned in fragments. Life, she realized, does not rush you. It creeps back gently, in small gestures, in ordinary moments that accumulate into recovery. The shadows of loss remained, but they no longer defined the perimeter of her world. She discovered strength in imperfection. The house she was rebuilding would not mirror the one that existed before the fire, nor would it carry the same illusions of control. Each wall, each step, was infused with intention, a recognition that fragility could coexist with resilience. Pain had taught her patience, loss had taught her focus, and with each choice, each mindful action, she reclaimed agency over a life that once felt stolen. The act of rebuilding became a meditation, a rhythm of determination that stitched together the frayed edges of her spirit. Small victories became landmarks. Completing a project at work, sending a message to a friend, even simply stepping outside on a day she didn't feel capable. Each moment offered proof that she was not merely surviving, but learning to thrive again. And with each success, no matter how minor, the impossible began to feel attainable. The fire that had once seemed like a permanent annihilator now appeared as a crucible, shaping her into someone capable of enduring, of creating, and of finding joy again. Reflection became a powerful tool. In quiet evenings, she reviewed the progress of the day, acknowledging effort rather than outcome, growth rather than perfection. The inner dialogue shifted. I am not the ashes. I am the hands that rebuild. Gratitude emerged for even the smallest gestures, the faintest signs that life still offered connection and opportunity. She realized that healing was not linear, nor was it complete, but it was tangible and visible in her daily choices. And this recognition, subtle as it was, fueled momentum, turning survival into purpose. The physical act of rebuilding mirrored the emotional restoration. She painted walls in colors that reflected hope rather than regret, arranged furniture to create spaces for reflection and laughter, and planted greenery that insisted on life amidst ruin. Each deliberate action was a declaration. The past had shaped her, but it would not define her. The tangible transformation inspired an internal shift. The first genuine smile, small and hesitant, felt like proof that rebirth was not an abstraction. She could feel it in her chest, warmth, possibility, and a quiet thrill of resilience taking hold. As days turned into weeks, she noticed a rhythm emerging, a cadence of movement, thought, and interaction that brought harmony back to life. The external world and internal landscape began to align. Where once silence had echoed loss, now held reflection and intent. Where once shadows lingered, light crept in with certainty and patience. And in this alignment, she realized profound truth. Rebuilding from ruins is not about returning to what was, but about embracing what could be. She paused in the doorway one morning, sunlight spilling across the floor she had restored, warmth dancing across walls that now carried intention rather than memory alone. In that moment, she understood that rebirth is both fragile and enduring. It is born from the recognition of loss and the courage to create anew. Her smile widened, not from perfection, but from the clarity that comes with movement forward, however tentative. The first steps, the first victories, the first glimmers of joy had coalesced into something undeniable. Life, even after devastation, could be reclaimed, reshaped, and made profoundly her own. The path ahead remained uncertain, but fear no longer commanded her. Each day was an opportunity to layer strength atop strength, to honor the past without being imprisoned by it, and to construct a life informed by wisdom, resilience, and hope. And as she stepped fully into this emerging reality, she felt the quiet power of transformation settle in her chest, a gentle, unwavering pulse. The ruins had not defined her. They had prepared her. And now, for the first time in a long while, she believed not only in recovery, but in the extraordinary possibility of what comes after fire. The same storm that broke you also built your wings, though it takes time to see the truth. The days of darkness, the nights filled with emptiness, were not the end but the forge where resilience was crafted. She paused on the edge of memory, recalling moments when despair felt absolute, when every breath seemed borrowed and every hope fleeting. "I didn't rise because I was strong," she whispered inwardly. "I rose because I had no choice." It was not heroism but necessity that propelled her forward. Each step a quiet defiance against the weight of everything that had tried to hold her down. Scars, once reminders of pain, now glinted like medals of survival. Each line a story of endurance, each ache a testament to persistence. The process of rising was gradual, invisible in its early stages, almost imperceptible. Small victories accumulated. A calm morning walk, a conversation without tension, a decision made without fear. These were the scaffolding of transformation, subtle yet profound. She noticed a shift in how she carried herself. Shoulders no longer slumped with grief, eyes no longer heavy with doubt. Confidence emerged quietly, seated by the realization that she had endured the unendurable and emerged not broken, but shaped. The past remained, but it no longer dictated her steps. Life was no longer something that happened to her. It was something she actively built, one conscious choice at a time. Reflection became her companion. She traced the arc from despair to clarity, witnessing how every trial had imparted wisdom that could not have been gained otherwise. The failures, betrayals, and losses were now chapters in the story of survival, not shame. And in this reflection, gratitude surfaced. Gratitude for pain, for the teachers that adversity had become, for the capacity to feel, to struggle, and ultimately, to rise. It was a quiet strength, unassuming but undeniable, a mastery of the self born from hardship, not immunity to it. The new self began to emerge fully, distinct yet inseparable from the old self. Shadows of fear remained, but they were tempered by awareness and resilience. She no longer sought to erase memory or emotion. Instead, she integrated them, learning that strength is not the absence of vulnerability, but the willingness to move forward despite it. Decisions were made with intention rather than reaction. Words carried weight, yet flowed with authenticity, and every interaction reflected a newfound balance between compassion and self-respect. The storm had not vanished, but its power over her had dissolved. Connections deepened, both with others and with herself. Relationships that survived the turbulence were stronger, built on honesty and shared understanding. Mentors, friends, and even strangers became mirrors reflecting the progress of her journey, each encounter reinforcing the sense that she was not just surviving, she was flourishing. In moments of solitude, she felt the quiet exhilaration of independence, the realization that she could face any future challenge with grace and composure. The inner dialogue that had once spiraled into despair now affirmed her capability. I am here. I am whole. I am rising. She began to act with intention, channeling past pain into purposeful action. Creativity, empathy, and courage were no longer abstract ideals, but living tools in her daily life. The narrative that once trapped her in victimhood had shifted. She was now author and protagonist, crafting each day with awareness and resolve. Even setbacks were reframed as lessons, not defeats. An emotional turbulence that had once overwhelmed her became a reminder of endurance, a compass pointing toward growth rather than despair. The rise was not dramatic in the cinematic sense. There was no sudden explosion of triumph, but it was profound in its subtlety. Strength revealed itself in consistency, in the calmness with which she approached each day, in the patience with which she rebuilt relationships and pursued goals. Gratitude intertwined with empowerment, forming a steady undercurrent that sustained her through moments of doubt. Where once darkness dictated her perception, now perspective and choice guided her. She had learned that control is not in avoiding pain, but in responding to it with clarity and courage. As the days unfolded, she recognized that the journey had come full circle. The pain that had once seemed insurmountable had been a teacher, the solitude a space for growth, the loss a catalyst for transformation. She was not untouched by life's storms, but she was unshaken by them. The rise was complete not because the world had changed, but because she had changed, stronger, wiser, and equipped with a quiet assurance that no adversity could erase the resilience now ingrained in her being. In the final reflection, she allowed herself a full smile, unguarded and authentic, feeling the harmony of inner strength and outward life. The scars glimmered as reminders, not of failure, but of courage. And in that moment, she understood every fall, every heartbreak, every trial had been a stepping stone to a self that could soar. Life, in all its unpredictability, had forged wings from the weight of adversity. If you've ever been broken, let this be your reminder. You can rise again. You can rebuild, reclaim your story with intention and courage. The storm does not define you. It is the wind beneath your wings. Share this story with someone who refuses to give up, because strength is contagious, and rising again is always possible.